Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the command deck, her fingers gripping the cool metal railing as the vast emptiness of space stretched before her. The stars glimmered like diamonds in the void, distant and unyielding, but they didn't matter now. Her mind was consumed with thoughts of Earth, the planet that had sent her and countless others into the galaxy's dark corners to fight for its survival. Her ship, the Titan's Wrath, a state-of-the-art warship, drifted like a predator in the shadows, waiting. Beneath the calm surface of space, chaos brewed. Humanity's enemies were growing bolder. The Galactic Council's threats were no longer idle. And with each passing day, their resolve was tested. "Captain, we've received another transmission." Marcus stood behind her, voice tight, yet carrying the weight of authority. His steady gaze met hers, a silent acknowledgement of the burden they both carried. "This one's from the Council. They're demanding surrender." She didn't need to hear the rest. The words were all too familiar. Earth's existence was a thorn in the Council's side, an inconvenient reminder that not all races bowed to alien supremacy. "Plot a course for the rendezvous point. We won't wait for them to come to us," she said, her voice cold, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Understood, Captain," Marcus replied with a nod, already turning back to the navigation console. He was a man of few words, but in times like this, his silence spoke volumes. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, the reality of their mission settling in like a lead weight. Sarah's chest tightened. She wasn't just commanding a ship, she was carrying the hopes of humanity on her shoulders. Every decision she made, every order she gave, could tip the scales of war. "Captain," Lieutenant Hall's voice broke through her thoughts. He was hunched over a console, fingers flying across the screen. His brow furrowed in concentration, eyes flicking between data streams. "We've got a new fleet entering the system. They're not one of ours." Sarah's pulse quickened as she spun on her heel to face him. The view from the bridge shifted, and the holographic display flickered to life, revealing an approaching armada, a mixture of sleek, menacing ships that didn't belong to any species they had encountered before. "How long until they're in range?" she asked, her voice betraying none of the fear that clawed at her insides. 20 minutes, Hall responded, his face pale as he continued to monitor the incoming fleet. "They're faster than expected. We won't have the luxury of waiting for backup." Sarah's eyes narrowed. Her hand hovered over the console, her thoughts racing. She knew the stakes. Humanity's enemies were united by one goal: wipe out Earth. And they had no intention of backing down. The Galactic Council was more than just a political force, it was a juggernaut determined to impose its will on every system they conquered. If they fell here, if Earth fell, the ripple effect would be catastrophic. "We can't outrun them," Sarah muttered to herself, pacing in tight circles. "We can't even outfight them with our current numbers." Marcus's voice cut through the growing tension. "Then we don't need to outrun them. We need to hit them where it hurts." Sarah paused, her hand clenching into a fist. He was right. The Titan's Wrath was formidable, but their true strength lay not in firepower alone, but in their tactics, the ability to strike swiftly and decisively. "We hit their command vessel. Take out their leader, and the rest will fall apart." Sarah's words were sharp, calculated. There was no room for hesitation. "Prepare the boarding pods. We're going in." The crew sprang into action. Marcus moved to the weapons console while Hall began coordinating with the rest of the crew. The air hummed with urgency as Sarah strapped on her tactical gear. Every second mattered. Her eyes flicked to the viewports, where the approaching enemy fleet grew larger, looming like a storm cloud ready to burst. Her thoughts raced. The odds were against them, but Earth's resolve had never been more steadfast. They had fought and bled for every inch of space they held, and Sarah wasn't about to let that slip away. "Boarding pods prepped and ready," Marcus called out, his voice steady but tense. "Launch on my command," Sarah replied, her eyes locked onto the enemy fleet. This was it. There was no turning back now. The seconds stretched like an eternity. Her pulse drummed in her ears. In the cold, unforgiving silence of space, the weight of the moment pressed down on her chest. If they succeeded, they would buy humanity the time it desperately needed. If they failed, the consequences would be dire. Earth, the cradle of their civilization, would burn. "Ready to fire in 5, Hall called, his voice taut with anticipation. Sarah nodded once, her face a mask of resolve. "Take the shot." The sound of the boarding pods launching echoed through the ship as it lurched forward, thrusting into the unknown. The Titan's wrath surged into battle, its weapons roaring to life, the first shots fired into the vastness of space, cutting through the distance toward their enemies. The battle had begun. Cliffhanger ending, the first pod collided with the enemy flagship's hull, sending a shockwave through the air. As Sarah's heart raced, the comms crackled to life, a voice garbled with static shouting, "Captain! We've got incoming reinforcements." "There." The transmission cut off abruptly. Sarah's gut clenched. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore, they were fighting for everything. The Titan's wrath lurched as it plowed through the debris field, its sleek hull vibrating with the force of distant explosions. The battle outside raged, a cacophony of fire and fury in the vacuum of space. Inside the bridge, the crew worked in unison, focused, resolute. The enemy was closing in, and time was running out. Captain Sarah Mitchell stood at the command console, her knuckles white from gripping the edge. Her eyes flicked across the tactical display, a flurry of red blips signifying incoming enemy ships, the once pristine space now riddled with flashes of light as the first volleys of laser fire streaked past. "Captain," Marcus's voice cut through the static. He was at the weapons console, his jaw tight with concentration. "They're coming at us fast, too fast. We won't outrun them." "We're not trying to outrun them," Sarah replied, her voice cold with resolve. "We're going to make them regret ever showing up." She turned to Lieutenant Hall, who was manning the sensors. His face, usually calm, was tight with tension. "How many ships are we dealing with?" "A fleet of 8, Hall answered, his voice a low hum, his fingers darting over the controls. "All advanced models." "They're no pushovers, Captain." "Then we'll give them a fight they'll never forget." Sarah's gaze hardened. She couldn't afford to falter now. Not with Earth's fate hanging in the balance. Her thoughts flashed to her home planet, the cradle of humanity's strength. The Earth that had once been on the brink of extinction, now a symbol of defiance in the galaxy. The Council's relentless pursuit of humanity's eradication only fueled her determination. She wasn't just fighting for survival, she was fighting to remind the universe that humans would never bow down. Sarah straightened, her mind focusing on the task at hand. "Prepare the weapons. Full power to the forward cannons. Marcus, get ready to fire the moment they're in range." "Aye, Captain." Marcus's hands moved with practiced precision, already adjusting the targeting systems. The hum of the ship's energy pulse built to a crescendo, a mechanical heartbeat that mirrored Sarah's growing tension. "They're charging their weapons," Hall warned. His voice barely rose above the low hum of the ship. "They'll be in range in 10 seconds. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She had no illusions. This wouldn't be easy. But the human spirit had been tested far beyond the limits of what these alien fleets could imagine. She gripped the console, feeling the cold steel against her palms, grounding herself. There would be no hesitation. No turning back. "Fire," she commanded. The Titan's wrath shuddered as its weapons unleashed a brilliant torrent of energy. The forward cannons fired in rapid succession, powerful beams of concentrated fire that tore through the vast emptiness of space. The first enemy ship, a sleek vessel with armor designed to withstand heavy fire, shattered in an explosion of debris. The crew's victory was short-lived, as another ship entered their firing range, its shields glowing with a fierce intensity. "Shields holding at 80%, Hall reported, his voice strained. "Another hit like that and we'll lose our advantage." "Hold steady," Sarah ordered. "We take them one by one. Marcus, target the second ship's engines. We need to slow them down." The ship rocked again, and Sarah felt the shudder deep in her bones. The battle was intensifying. She could feel the weight of every decision she made. Lives were on the line, not just the crew of the Titan's Wrath, but the entire human race. Every move had to count. "We've got incoming fighters," Hall shouted, his voice rising in alarm. "Dozens of them." Sarah's eyes darted to the sensor screen. The enemy fleet wasn't just larger than they had anticipated, it was strategic. As the larger ships engaged the Titan's Wrath, a swarm of smaller fighters closed in, closing the distance faster than they could react. "Deploy the drone swarm. I want those fighters neutralized before they can get any closer," Sarah barked, her voice sharp with authority. "Aye, Captain," Marcus responded. His fingers flew across the controls, launching a flurry of automated drones from the ship's hangar. They shot out in all directions, buzzing like angry hornets, locking onto the approaching fighters. The battle was now a chaotic dance, beams of energy crisscrossing the void, fighters darting in and out of the fray. The Titan's Wrath was a moving target, dodging, firing, retaliating, but it was clear that the enemy had numbers, and they were relentless. "Captain," Hall called, his voice strained. "There's something else. Another fleet. It's bigger than the first one." Sarah's stomach twisted. They were outnumbered and outgunned, and the situation was deteriorating faster than she could process. "Do we have any backup?" she demanded, her voice tight with anxiety. "No," Marcus replied flatly. "We're on our own." A heavy silence fell over the bridge. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, knowing full well that the odds were stacked against them. Sarah could feel the weight of every decision pressing down on her. Earth had sent them to this point for a reason. She had to believe that. "We fight until we can't fight anymore," Sarah said, her voice steady with unshakable resolve. "We'll make them remember who we are." The tension in the air thickened, a storm cloud hanging over them as the Titan's Wrath continued its desperate dance in the cold depths of space, the fate of humanity hanging in the balance. Cliffhanger ending, a deep rumble shook the ship, followed by a violent tremor that rattled every console. The sensors screamed with warnings as the vast new fleet entered the fray, a blackened mass of ships so numerous they seemed to swallow the stars themselves. "We're out of time," Marcus said softly, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Captain, they've already launched their boarding pods. We need to act now." The Titan's Wrath shuddered again, a violent tremor that sent sparks flying from the overhead lights. Sarah Mitchell's heart pounded in her chest as she grabbed the nearest console for support. The bridge was bathed in an eerie red glow, alarms blaring with a sharp, insistent shriek. "They've breached the outer hull," Lieutenant Hall shouted, his face pale with alarm as his fingers flew over the controls. "Boarding pods are making contact with the starboard side." Sarah's gaze flicked to the tactical map. A dozen glowing red blips were already inside the ship, darting through the vast interior like shadows. "Where's the crew?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the panic. "They're scrambling to the defensive positions, but we're outnumbered." Marcus's voice was grim as he turned to face her, his hands frozen above the weapons console. "The enemy's already inside. They've got us in a vice grip." Sarah swallowed hard. Every second counted. If they didn't act quickly, this ship, humanity's last hope, would fall. "We can't let them take this ship," Sarah muttered under her breath. Her hands gripped the edge of the command console. "Marcus, you're with me. We're going down to the lower decks to hold them off. Hall, you're in charge here. We need to make sure the engines stay online." "Understood," Hall said, his voice steely, despite the fear in his eyes. "I've got this. Good luck." Without another word, Sarah turned to Marcus, who was already donning his combat gear. The tight-fitting suit was designed for close-quarters combat, sleek and functional. His jaw was clenched in determination, but his eyes betrayed the fear that tugged at him. "Let's go," Sarah said, her voice firm. She didn't wait for him to respond, heading toward the exit. The corridors of the Titan's Wrath were dark, lit only by the flickering emergency lights. As they moved quickly through the twisting hallways, the sound of distant explosions rumbled through the ship. Sarah's boots echoed on the metal floors as she and Marcus pressed forward, adrenaline spiking with each step. Do you think we can win this? Marcus asked, his voice tight with tension. He was barely keeping pace with her, and she could sense the doubt in his words. We don't have a choice, Sarah answered, her mind already racing through a dozen different strategies. If we don't fight back, we'll lose everything. As they turned a corner, the first wave of enemy soldiers appeared, their armored forms glowing with an unnatural energy. They were unlike anything Sarah had ever seen, twisted, alien creatures with long, jagged limbs and dark, insect-like exoskeletons. One of the creatures lunged at Sarah, a hissing screech tearing from its mouth. Without hesitation, she drew her blaster, firing twice. The first shot struck the creature in the chest, sending it sprawling to the floor. The second hit its comrade, who had tried to flank them. The alien dropped, crumpling like a rag doll. Keep moving, Sarah ordered, her voice commanding despite the thundering chaos in her chest. They couldn't afford to stop. They had to push deeper into the ship, to the control room where the heart of the invasion was likely to be centered. Marcus nodded, his eyes focused, scanning the area. But as they moved forward, the air grew thicker, the weight of their impending defeat pressing on them like a vice. Another alien rounded the corner, its elongated arm reaching out with terrifying speed. Before Sarah could react, Marcus slammed into it, driving the creature to the ground with a brutal punch. The impact reverberated through the hallway, a sickening crack echoing off the walls. I didn't sign up for this, Marcus grunted, stepping over the fallen creature as he reloaded his weapon. No one did, Sarah replied tersely. But we're in it now. They reached the access hatch to the lower levels. Sarah's hand was already on the release button when she heard the sound of footsteps, more of the aliens, closing in on them. They didn't have time to waste. The hatch slid open with a hiss, revealing the darkened control room. The air was thick with the scent of burnt metal and ozone. There were no signs of life here, no crew, no resistance. Only silence. Until the door behind them slammed shut with a deafening crash. Marcus spun, raising his weapon, but it was already too late. The last of the enemy boarding pods had launched, and they were not alone. Figures stepped from the shadows, tall, armored soldiers with eyes glowing like molten lava. They didn't speak, their presence alone enough to send a wave of terror crashing over Sarah. The lead alien stepped forward, its voice low and rasping. Human resistance is futile. This is your end. Sarah's stomach clenched. She knew this wasn't just an invasion, this was a message. A declaration. And it was one she couldn't ignore. You'll have to kill me first, Sarah spat, her grip tightening on her blaster. The alien soldier smiled, a cold, reptilian grin that sent shivers down her spine. We'll see about that. Before Sarah could raise her weapon, the enemy surged forward, and all hell broke loose. The Titan's wrath was under attack in ways it had never been before, and the fight for humanity's survival was about to escalate to its darkest point yet. Cliffhanger ending, Sarah's mind raced as she dove for cover, the chaos escalating around her. She barely had time to breathe when a sudden explosion rocked the control room. A massive burst of energy tore through the walls, hurling her backward into the steel floor. Dazed, Sarah's vision blurred. A single thought crossed her mind, this could be it. The jagged metal shards from the explosion rained down around Sarah like hailstones. Her head spun as she struggled to push herself up from the cold, cracked floor of the control room. Smoke and dust clouded the air, and the oppressive smell of scorched wires made her stomach lurch. Her ears rang, muffling the chaos unfolding around her. But despite the shock, one thought burned through her mind: they couldn't win. Humanity couldn't fall here. Fighting the dizziness, Sarah staggered to her feet, her hand gripping a railing for support. The walls of the control room were barely intact, the once pristine panels were now twisted and smoking, their screens flickering weakly. Ahead of her, the alien soldiers advanced, their glowing eyes fixed on her like predators circling their prey. Sarah! Marcus's voice broke through the haze, frantic and strained. He was kneeling beside a panel, trying to reroute power to the damaged sections. We need to fall back. We can't hold them off much longer. Sarah's eyes snapped toward him. She could see the fear in his face, his knuckles white as he gripped his weapon. But there was no sign of retreat in his posture. He wasn't about to run. Neither was she. "No," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "We fight. We end this now." Marcus hesitated for a moment, looking at her with a mix of disbelief and admiration. But then, he nodded, his resolve hardening. "All right. But we need to make sure we're not alone in this." Sarah glanced around, assessing the situation. The enemy was closing in, their alien physiology making them formidable opponents. But humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their size or strength, it was in their will to survive. "Hall, do you read?" Sarah's voice echoed through the comms. There was a long pause, and for a moment, she feared the worst. But then, Hall's voice crackled through, strained but clear. "I'm here. We've got backup. You just need to hold on a little longer." Sarah exhaled in relief, knowing they weren't entirely alone. She turned to Marcus. "We hold this position until Hall gets here. We can't let them reach the central command." Marcus's lips pressed into a thin line. "Understood." Without another word, they moved to the control panel. Sarah's fingers flew over the remaining working controls, activating security protocols and locking down vital systems. They didn't have much left, but they had enough. The remaining crew members had done everything they could to delay the aliens, buying them this crucial time. The doors to the control room suddenly slammed open. The first of the alien soldiers charged in, their weapons raised and mouths snarling. Sarah fired without hesitation, her shots ringing out with deadly accuracy. Each strike was precise, one down, then another. But for every alien she dropped, two more seemed to take their place. She could feel the adrenaline pumping through her veins, sharpening her senses. Every move felt deliberate, each second a battle for survival. Her hands were steady despite the chaos, her eyes narrowed as she focused on the next target. "Stay focused," Sarah shouted to Marcus, who was firing alongside her. "We can't let them overwhelm us." Marcus grunted, his expression tight with determination. "We won't." Just as Sarah took down another alien, the ground shook again. This time, it wasn't the impact of an explosion, it was something heavier, a powerful thud that reverberated through the entire ship. The walls trembled, and she could hear the distant hum of the engines faltering. The Titan's wrath was starting to lose power. They were running out of time. She didn't let the panic show on her face, but her mind raced. They needed to stop the breach, get the ship back online. Without the engines, they were sitting ducks. The aliens could board at will, and all their resistance would be in vain. "Marcus, we need to get to the engine room, now," she commanded. He didn't argue, following her lead as they pushed forward, blasting their way through the hallway toward the nearest engine access. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning metal, but they couldn't afford to slow down. They needed to shut down the aliens' ability to breach the core systems. As they rounded the corner, the door to the engine room loomed ahead. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. If they could get there in time, if they could secure the power grid, they might have a chance. But as the door slid open, the chilling sight of several alien soldiers emerged from the shadows, blocking their path. "You won't make it," the leader sneered, his glowing eyes narrowing in on Sarah. "You're outnumbered, and you're running out of time." Sarah's grip tightened on her blaster. She wasn't about to give up now. "We'll see about that," she spat, stepping forward and taking aim. Just as the battle seemed to reach its breaking point, the sound of engines roaring to life echoed through the ship. A cheer broke out over the comms. Hall had come through. The Titan's Wrath's engines roared to life, a burst of power surging through the ship. The gravity well that had been sucking them into the heart of enemy territory had faltered, just enough to give them a fighting chance. "We're not dead yet," Sarah muttered, her eyes locked on the enemy. "Let's finish this." But the aliens weren't backing down. The tension was unbearable, the outcome hanging by a thread as Sarah and Marcus prepared for their final stand. Cliffhanger ending. Suddenly, the ship lurched again, this time more violently. Sarah's body was thrown against the bulkhead, her vision blurring as she tried to regain her balance. The door to the engine room slammed shut behind them, sealing them inside. Outside, the last alien soldiers closed in. "Hold your ground," she said through gritted teeth. "We're not finished yet."